Hey, Eddie Sawyers.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to have you on Founder Design Thinking episode 17.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I'll do a quick intro and then I'll turn it over to you for a quick intro. How does that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. And anyone who's joining us online, please comment where you're coming from. And if you have any questions for Eddie, you can comment throughout this podcast. So I'm Jay-Z. Founder Design Thinking is a podcast where our goal is to find more than 10 unicorns like us, which we've already done, but we're going to keep going. And I love consulting companies and taking them from 0 to 1. I also provide software on creativity, opportunity sizing, and note taking. So my Calendly is scrolling under here along with Eddie's LinkedIn. So feel free to schedule time with me to talk about getting customers or doing design thinking brainstorm. And Eddie, I will turn it over to you. Introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I wish I had the same stunning glasses as you have. I feel underdressed
Oh,
today.
next time I'll ship some to you if you
Yeah,
promise to
that
wear them.
sounds really good. We should do that. We should have matching ones. I'll introduce myself. I'm Eddie. I've been in product for a number of years now, mostly in the B2B SaaS environment. And most recently, I was leading product at a company called Tillo, who are a leading B2B gift card provider. And after a good 6 years there, a very good 6 years there, I'm now on the lookout for new opportunities and new glasses, by the looks of things. So
I think everyone I worked with has some awesome glasses, so you all should comment
that's what I'm missing.
But Eddie, do you have perfect vision? You don't need glasses?
I don't, but that doesn't mean I'm not jealous of those.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Eddie, let's start with one of the 3 questions. So, how much impact has design thinking made your company? I think you've talked about some assumptions in gift cards. So, tell me about, what was the assumption and how you changed it with user
Yeah,
research.
so I mean, at Tillo, I was always trying to push my teams to de-risk what we were doing as much as possible because development's expensive. We all know that, and developing the wrong thing is even worse, right? So that's the worst thing you can do. So we, but so we always tried to test things out as much as we could, test our assumptions, and we we had a situation where we had done quite a lot of research and we had some very compelling data into, if we managed to increase the number of relationships between the companies that we had buying gift cards and the retailers who are selling their gift cards, the Walmarts, the John Lewis Amazons of the world, if we managed to increase the number of relationships between those, that would be beneficial. We had that research and we were looking at ways as to how to improve that. That was our main scope there. So we were looking at what ideas we could do. And one of our assumptions that we came up with was that if we changed our catalog page and made it easier for people to navigate through that and find what they're looking for, we would increase more relationships, and that, as we knew, would be beneficial. So that was kind of the assumption and the goal and the data behind what we were doing. And one of the things we thought, and it seemed like a really obvious idea, was to categorize them. And you've probably been to shopping sites where you're able to search and go, okay, I'm looking for fashion, or I'm looking for dining out or eating out, or supermarkets or anything like that. So categorization, we thought if we added that and enabled our customers to come in and search by that, they would find what they're looking for, and they would find more of what they were looking for, and therefore they would increase relationships and everyone's going to be happy. So that was our assumption. We were fairly confident that was going to be right because we've all seen it on different sites. This didn't feel like a world-beating idea, but we thought we should test it. So that's where we were. So we tested that. So we created, rather than jumping in and developing it, we did some mock-ups, various different designs. And we spoke to our customers. We showed them our customers, what we're thinking and how it worked. And actually the designs went down well. People were like, yeah, that looks really good. The kicker for us was that actually when asked, would you use this particular feature? Is this useful for us? The answer was no. And we were absolutely staggered by that. We very shocked, and we did a number of interviews with that where, the answer was no. And what we learned about our customer behavior was that when they are looking for new relationships, they've got something in mind already. They already know what they're looking for. They're not actually using us to browse to do that. They are already aware of what they need and what they want. So that's just wouldn't have been useful for them at all. That's not what we could have done. So we didn't build that. And that's actually a great way of showing that our assumptions were wrong. And we didn't waste a lot of development effort in not only creating the pages and the redesigns, but also cataloging all of the categories for the thousands of retailers on the platform, which nobody wanted to do. That was not going to be a popular job to hand out. So actually we saved ourselves loads of time by proving ourselves wrong, and we learned a lot about how our customers use our platform at the same time. And it meant that we could do something different instead. So we were able to, without wasting months of development time, work on something that would have an impact, because the assumption was still there, but if we increased relationships, that would be beneficial. But the solution that we thought that we were going to have to move that metric, that wasn't the right one.
Isn't that nice to get months of development time back?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it was a popular one to bin because nobody wanted to do that particular hard labor. So, and nobody wants to spend a lot of time building something only to find out that it's not useful and it's not made any difference at all. So, yeah, getting that time back and being able to focus on something different was really good. And actually, as much as it felt like, oh, it's a failure, we've done these designs and actually nobody likes them, it wasn't a failure. It was a success because we didn't build the wrong thing at that point. So,
how much time did it take to run the user test, the user research?
Gosh, thinking back as to that. So, I mean, it wasn't long. The mock-ups didn't take that long. Probably if any of my designers are watching, they're going to scream at me that they took ages and it was a lot of hard work. But it didn't take the length of time it would have taken to develop it. It was a fraction of that time. And in terms of the user tests, we got a pretty good steer on the first few. So it wasn't like we had to do hundreds of user tests. It was fairly obvious from the first few that this was an idea to can, effectively. So it saved us loads of time.
Yeah, I love this coupon and conversion space. So both at the buy now, pay later startup that I worked at and at Capital One, the credit card company, we were always playing in that last mile conversion where people were searching for H&M or just that one name, and they just wanted to get like 5% off as quickly as possible because they were already, at the checkout or in the online like time to check out. And so trying to get people earlier in the curve where they're just deciding, do I want fashion, or I think you said home goods? Do I want this brand of Zenni optical glasses or the real Gucci ones? Am I going to pay like $50 versus $500? We were always trying to get people earlier in the discovery, kind of like an Instagram, Pinterest stage. But at that late stage, where people already decided.
Yeah.
How did you and your team end up solving for increasing the number of merchants that each client purchased at?
Yeah, so there was it wasn't one thing that prompted it. So one of the things, talking about how getting them earlier in the journey, so letting people know what was new onto our platform, and in getting those communications out to them, so that they knew what was new. They didn't know to go looking for it. We told them beforehand, so they could come straight to the platform and find it. Other ways we solved it was making it quicker for them to set up. So, one of the things that slows things down is that there's sometimes some manual processes behind the scenes to put things together. So we worked very hard on making that a lot smoother and a lot quicker to do. So there was a number of things: communication, back end improvements in terms of speed. Those were the things that moved the metrics much more than actually browsing or anything like that. There were a few refined filters on the page that we were testing that we could improve as well, but the main drivers were earlier communication.
I see. So at the point of sale, you're not creating friction, you're not interrupting the user, but you're communicating. Are you communicating after the sale?
Because of the nature of it, the relationship's created before any sales. So
okay.
So this was letting them know what's new on the platform, so that they can come and add what they wanted new. They didn't need to go and browse. They were never browsing. They were never coming to us unsure of what they wanted to buy. That decision had already been made. So this was all about letting them know what's new and available for you to then come and buy later.
I see. So in the acquisition stage, you're already communicating this list, healthy list of supply. And then when the client comes and buys, they just go immediately to buy.
They've already got that list. They know what's there and they know what they want.
Okay. And you removed some back-end friction at that point where they're buying.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to the second question then. What's the most surprising thing that has happened in scaling product teams?
It's a good question. So I think the most surprising thing for me, and an eye-opening thing for me, is all about knowledge transfer. So when you start, especially if you're starting at a small startup to begin with, you're wearing a lot of hats. There's only a few of you. Everyone knows everything that's going on, and you know everything about your product. If you're the product person there, you're the product leader, you know everything because you're doing everything, and you've got that knowledge through the battle scars of the decisions and the mistakes that you've made. You know everything about what's going on. And then when you start scaling a team, one of the mistakes you can make is assuming that next person in knows what you know, because you come you're so confident in what you're doing, and it's second nature that this is just the knowledge of how things work. But you forget that these people weren't with you at the beginning. They didn't go through all those mistakes and those learnings, so they don't have that what you see as quite basic knowledge. And any small company startup I've worked at or heard of, they're not particularly good at the documentation side of things. So it's hard for them to pick that up. So I think that's a real challenge, and that's something that I think a lot of leaders struggle with, is suddenly finding that a lot of what they assumed was basic knowledge is not basic and not something people know.
Yeah, I think there's some incredible satisfaction in having been in all the pivots and knowing what comes next. So how do you transfer that knowledge?
Yeah, and there's no one easy answer to that, but because you've probably not documented anything, so you can't just let someone loose with a whole load of documents because you haven't done that. So you've got to do a few things. You've got to, first of all, you've got to accept that this situation exists. You've got to accept that there are things in your product and the way your company works that and somebody new coming in probably has no chance of learning unless you teach them. So you've got to be patient, and you've got to actually put the effort in transferring some of that knowledge. And you've got to set up kind of like the environment where it's okay for them to ask you, those questions more than once, probably, because, it's going to come up a few times. There's going to be some weird thing which, hasn't come up in 4 years or something, and suddenly it comes up and nobody knows what it is. You've got to foster that environment where your team are comfortable coming to you and asking you what might be a frustrating question for you, because you know it off the back of your hand. So you've got to foster that environment, but you've also got to hire well. So when you're dealing in a scaling team, especially in a small startup, you've got to hire for people who are naturally curious, people who are going to want to get stuck in and learn the hard way a little bit, get going, seek the information themselves, not be afraid to ask questions, not be afraid to, be the person in that room saying, I don't understand why it's done this way. Can somebody explain that to me? Which is hard sometimes when you're coming in and, being the one saying, I don't know something. But you've got to, if you hire a good team like that, you'll see the benefits of that, because they will pick things up. They'll be confident in asking you, and that knowledge transfer starts to move along. And I think the other thing is that you've got to trust them to do this and make decisions themselves as well. I think that's quite hard for product leaders who've probably, it was their baby from the beginning, and they were the one person in charge and they made all the decisions. You've got to let go of that. And you've got to let these people who don't know everything, they haven't got all the, the battle wounds of your decisions, to actually make decisions themselves and learn the hard way. And you've got to give them the environment where that's not a bad thing. If they've done something wrong, they're not going to feel like they're in trouble. They feel empowered to make that decision and make those mistakes, but also feel comfortable enough to come and ask you for help if needed. So,
oh, you were going to say something else?
No, that was it.
So on the continuum between you giving them the context versus them asking for the context, are you saying there's a healthy balance, or would you prefer that you're hiring proactive people who are just asking the context?
You've always got to, as a product leader, you've always got to give the context. That's your job. You've got to give the higher context down. But what you've got to do is then allow them to take that and run with it. So you've got to assess your team and work out where their capabilities lie and how much, guardrail, how wide are the guardrails that you're going to give them responsibility for. So, more junior members, you give a smaller scope, but you give them the context. And then within those guardrails, that's them. You trust them to get on with what it is and find out what they need to know. And that might be coming back to you and asking for your help, but hopefully, proactively learning. And then a more senior person, you give wider scope to. And then they start becoming those domain experts within that, because that's what you want. You can't be the person making all the decisions anymore. That doesn't work. That's not going to scale. So the only way to do that is to give up some of the control you have. Give the context, but give the trust to your team to actually go out and do it and become the experts and get people to come to them. Otherwise, you're the bottleneck and everything slows down.
So then, in terms of, my experience with this, I had teams where I have them go ask their peers, should they build it? Should we build it? Who should own this when there are new scope areas that come up. And then so I will, with their peer leader, make that decision, but they gather the initial data and they make a recommendation. So I was curious if you have any examples or that you can talk about, you know, from an intellectual property perspective?
I can't think of any good examples off the top of my head, but I very much, you know, it's a joy when your team come back to you with ideas themselves, and they're proactively coming back with data, and they're saying, I think we should do, this is what I think we should do. And I really try to encourage people to make their decisions, because at the beginning they come to you and they want you to make the decision. You know, they're bringing you the data and they want you to make the decision. And what I try to encourage is that, okay, what would your decision be? What would you do? Let's see how your thinking goes on this. And then when they come up with that and you say, okay, well, let's go with that decision then. So, and then what that does, it builds their confidence, and then they come back to you with, this is what I think we should do. And it's a much different conversation there. It's more, this is my lead. This is where I think we should go. And you're like that. It's wonderful when that happens. It's actually a joy, because you're like, this is working. I'm not making this decision. They are working through the process. They've come up with the data, then understanding and what the objectives should be within their area, and they're going to push forward with that. And that's when you start feeling like, okay, you're building a good team here.
But we talked about the initial sting of someone's recommendation being not what you would have recommended, and how do you get over that? Because I think that people have, once, you know, they share the data, it's obvious, oh, maybe that's an equally good solution. But then when they're equally good, who makes the decision? Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's hard. And I've certainly gone the wrong way on this a few times, possibly not the wrong way, but, you know, it's very easy as someone who's made all the decisions to say, well, my opinion is the most important one, so I'm going to make that decision, or get upset with a decision that's been made. Like the quickest way to kill confidence in your team is to say you can make the decisions, and then when they do, come back in and say, no, that's not what we should do, and you know, manage that out and then go your way instead. Because they'll never do that again. They'll be constantly coming to you to make the decisions then, because, you know, you've chopped their legs off at that point. So you've got to be strong as a product leader and accept that people are different to you, and they will make the different decisions. And you've got to be brave and say, well, okay, that wouldn't necessarily been the way I did it, but let's go with it and see how it runs. And I've definitely been on the end where I thought that it was the wrong decision at a time, and I didn't say anything and I let them go with it, and my goodness, they were completely right. So you know, it does bear fruit, and you've just got to accept that nobody's going to make exactly the same decisions as you, and that's fine. That is fine, and sometimes very beneficial.
Oh, so you don't even tell them there's a trade-off, there's a better decision perhaps, or you're just having the conversation internally and talking yourself down from feeling that confidence, right?
It really does depend, because if you think they're on the wrong track and you're going to try and help them, you can put an alternative to them and say, have you thought about this? But let them then go away and think about it. But you have to be very careful in how you position that, as I'm not telling you that you have to do this, but I'm giving you a bit more data and experience to help you make your decision. And that's a very different thing to, no, you're wrong, you've got to do this, go this way. So sometimes it is beneficial, but sometimes, yeah, you've got to talk yourself down and think, well, actually, there's nothing wrong with what they've suggested. It's just not what you had in your head. That's not what you expected them to come up with. And I've certainly seen that on a few designs where in my head, it was going to be about 5 different buttons and a whole flow. And then when it's come back around to me to have a look at it, it's like, oh, it's just one button up there. And it's so obvious once I saw it. And it's like, well, thank goodness for letting them make their own decisions on that.
Yeah, I'm lucky to have a group of other managers to talk to about like, oh, I really wanted to say it, but I didn't, And then when I have really junior people on my team, they do make mistakes, and I just ask them to make them quickly, like in less than a week. So we're not spending months making a mistake, and then they see it themselves and they quickly, change course. And I think that's beautiful too, where you give them the resource to learn themselves versus me telling them, hey, that's not going to work.
I think that's the best way to learn is to be doing it yourself, and with that comes the wins and the losses. I always say that when people can't make decisions, it's like, well, think about that decision. If that decision can be reversed, quickly,
right.
then what's holding you back? Make that decision, go that way, learn. If it's wrong, well, you already know you can go back and change. That's not a problem to do. So what's holding you back? Why are you waiting? So
especially if it's a A/B test and the split is only like 5 or 50%, you can roll it back easily. So then just to close out this question in terms of founders and people who are scaling their first product team, how much documentation is it? 3 one-on-ones or one big onboarding meeting with like 10 pages of documentation? Like what is the formula? How much is too much?
I'm going to give a classic. It depends on. It's got to be. You got to think about that. You got to treat that as a product yourself. Really, your onboarding of what works, what doesn't work, and test it out really, because it's going to change over time. The first person you bring on is going to be brought on completely different to just your fifth person. Even the what works, what doesn't work. A lot of it will be one-on-one coaching to begin with, but as your team scales, that's not going to work. You can't do that for everybody. So you've got to then get your other people to start doing that as well. And I try to keep the documentation to not a minimum, but like the core details that are needed, because it's out of date documentation usually by the time it's been written. So it's an iterative process. You've got to try what works, and you've got to think of it like that. You've got to think, okay, what's worked? How's that measured up? How can you improve it next time? And treat it like a product. Treat your onboarding like a product, and keep iterating and changing, because your company will change, your team will change. What worked for person 1 will be different to person 5.
So what is the metric then? Is it some historical context, like new people on the team know we prioritized X last year and then we deprioritized X this year? Is that all that they need to know?
I think your metric it's a hard one to really say there's a firm metric, but it's more of a, how is that person moving on? Are they making progress within their areas? Are they making decisions? Are they comfortable, or are they coming to you all the time, unsure of what's going on? In which case, you're probably not doing something right. So it's a less tangible metric. It's more of a, how's the team functioning? Has that new person started, progressing forward? Are they happy? Are they feeling comfortable? That's one thing that you should always ask your team is, how are they doing? A lot of people focus on just the project work, but when you're building a team, you've got to focus on the individual as well, and how do they want to learn, and how are they feeling, and ask them those questions, and try and build the trust so that they will answer them truthfully for you. And then you start to get a feeling when things are going right, and you see the initiatives work, and you see their work is good quality. So
yeah, I've had people on my team who say, I don't know how to make this decision because everyone wants a different outcome, or I keep asking and then there's more information and more information. It just gets more and more confusing. And so I give them, the latitude. Well, take the next week, like make a decision in the next week, because we just want to get the data instead of continuing getting more information and getting stuck. So I think that's a really great metric that you're proposing. It is just the progress as a team makes and how confident they feel in making a decision.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think we're at getting towards the end. Third question. It's a question about questions. So do you have any questions for this founderdesignThinking.com community?
Do I have any questions? I think, do I have any questions for this community? I think it's what's the best way that this community can move forward next? Where is it going next? Is, what are the trends in design thinking? I think that's an interesting question. I'll be interested to hear people's takes on, because it is interesting. Everyone does things differently, don't they? And everyone has different views on things. So yeah, I'd be interested to see how the community feel this. Where's it going to go? Where's the next trends? How is AI going to affect how we do things when we're thinking about design thinking?
Yeah, I've been using AI with my clients, and it's great. It is saving so much time and giving us time back so we can be more strategic. And I think a lot of people in the community are just starting to test it out. So I'd love to have more people on about how they're using AI, but like also demoing like a project.
Yeah, I think that would be fascinating to see how, real life examples of how people are making that work for them, because it's not, there's a lot of noise about AI at the moment, obviously everywhere, but it's not just in the products that we're going to see it. It's in how those products are put together and the processes. Lots of people say, oh, you're going to get replaced. This is going to be replaced. Designers are going to be replaced. Movie actors are going to be replaced, by AI. But I actually think they're just going to have more time to spend on different activities. So, and it's a tool for good in that respect. So,
awesome. Well, I think that's it. Eddie, anything you want to leave the community with in terms of a last quote or a call to action?
I think one thing, I'd like to pass on for any product leaders looking to scale their team is, it is going to be hard to let go. It is really hard to let go, but you have to make that effort. But when I say let go, that doesn't mean, just never check in with your team, but make sure that you're there and you're trusting them, because if you trust them, you will see your results get better.
Oh, actually, can I ask you one more question related to that?
You can, yeah.
Sorry, I just had this question before and I forgot to ask. So in terms of jobs to be done, when you go from first and only product manager to CPO, what is your job now? How do you define that new role?
So it's interesting when you go to that level, you've got two teams at that point. You've got your senior team, and your job on that senior team is different, but it's the voice of the product team as much as the voice of the product at that level. And then for your team, your job it's not talking to customers anymore, really. Not the same. I mean, you should, but it's not. Your job is much more about empowering your team. That's your job. It's making sure that they know what they're doing and they are working correctly. They are functioning as a unit and they are producing the product stuff. You're stepped away at this point. You shouldn't be anywhere near writing user stories or anything. You should be giving the context and helping them, unblocking them, and making sure that the team is running efficiently. So it is a very different role completely, and it's not for everyone. Some, if you like getting involved in, user research and writing user stories, you know, maybe that's not the step you want because you do step away from that.
I see. So it's two parts. One is advocating for the product team in the executive's eyes. And then two is helping the product team develop themselves, either in terms of connecting with design, tech, or, you know, non-product, but also developing their own product skills.
Yeah, it's giving them the umbrella really to help, you know, make sure that the cross functionality between the teams is running. It's really more about your product is then your team, much more than the actual product, because they're looking after the product.
Well, everyone get in touch with Eddie if you have those moments where you're like, ah, I'm just going to pivot my role and have someone to talk to you about how that feels.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to chat through. If anyone has any questions on that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eddie, for taking the time. I know it's late for you in the UK, and for all of your insights, sharing them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.